There's a plaque at the Trinity Dam that reads, "Built by and for the people of the United States to conserve and wisely use the waters of these mountains." But that dam has had a very negative effect on water levels, fish population. You talk about maybe some of the impact that damming has had for this place right here.
Well, the first most visible and most immediate impact, and something that, when we get to talk about restoring it, basically you have the headwater areas that are completely blocked off from access to fish, and that was some of the prime spawning and rearing grounds for anadromous fish, the fish that we depend upon here. And that's lost forever. There's something like well-documented over 100 miles plus miles of habitat that's just no longer accessible to fish. When the dam went in, there was a hatchery built. It was probably contemporary thinking, contemporary science, if you want to call it that, at the time, that yeah, man could mitigate for and make up for that loss, just that ability for fish to get there. So today what we're left with is, in hindsight, that thinking probably wasn't the right thinking. Reducing the river flows by something like 80 to 90%. There's a lot of things, sediments, the encroachment of the riparian area, the large trees that exist there today. And that, when you look back, anyway, that's getting into the restoration side of it, but to the question, I guess, that probably was wisdom of the day. That was a thinking that water was somehow wasting to the ocean. I've seen statements that presidents made when they dedicated the Trinity River Division in the 60s, and yet when Congress envisioned, developed, and authorized the construction of the project, there's one unique provision in there that's under the Bureau of Reclamation's own laws that said that that only water surplus to the needs of the Fish and Wildlife Act was actually pretty direct to the fish and wildlife needs of the basin would be diverted. So when you fast forward that 40, 50 plus years of operation, and like you said, the devastation that it's created, then those laws came back, and subsequent laws in the 90s that said, okay, what does the river need for that fish and wildlife protection? And we've been able to work with the federal government in some instances and establish a strategy for recovering and restoring the river. A lot of challenges ahead of us yet, but over the years there's been over $100 million, if not $100 million plus dollars have been spent in restoring that river, acknowledging that that wasn't the intent of Congress when they built or authorized and constructed the project. But almost 50 years later now, the missing element has been the water. So that is a challenge that we face today, is saying, okay, we got the water now. Are we going to be able to show that we're successful with that and show success in recovering fish populations?
Even today, when we floated down the river, you looked back and you saw something that was different. What was that?
Well, I try to learn. I'm of the school of knowledge. I wasn't the best student. It took me a little bit longer. I didn't, but I got through college. And one of the things that I've learned in life is looking. I try to learn all the time. And one of the things I observed last year, we had a lot of rain and a lot of snow, and pretty near a flood event around the first of the year. And a lot of water in the reservoir, one of the higher rain and snowfall years that we've seen in quite some time. And one of the things we just had about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, we have a river cleanup. It's a part of a national effort, and it's our part in cleaning up the Trinity River. And I took my drift boat out, and anyway, what I observed is just looking, I said, something is different here, and it's less frequent that I get out in the water. I fish a lot in the springtime, but I was just said, what's different, and I looked and just floating down the river, and I saw like really high banks and a really incised channel, and that's just, to me, that's, something's different, and what is different from the high flows in this far down in the basin. I haven't looked at the upper river, and that's the other thing that just field biology and field observation, but there's one of the purposes in this past year in the release schedules that they saw was to move sediments. We had a lot of tributary fine sediments that were inputted into the system, and one of the objectives this year was to move some of that out of the spawning ground areas. In the upper 40 miles of, the 40 miles below the dam is where most of the fish spawn, so that's really the target area for restoration.
You're fighting this battle to reclaim the river, to restore the river, on three fronts: legislatively, public awareness, but scientifically as well. The efforts here, the Hoopa tribal fisheries, have resulted in groundbreaking landmark research programs and data collections. Can you talk maybe just briefly about some of that?
Well, I guess the stars have lined up on a lot of instances where we, over the course of the years, in terms of restoring this river, we've had administrative attempts. We've had pretty consistent voices from Congress that have said, yeah, we've diverted water. We've in part had a lot to do with the demise of the fishery in this river. What are we going to do about it? And Congress has, on a number of occasions, said, in 1984 with the Trinity Restoration Program Act, in 1992 with the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which was landmark legislation that said one of the, it's always the purposes of the Central Valley Project has been hydropower, municipal, and industrial uses. It added an environmental provision. We were able to get legislation enacted in '92. But back to your question, I guess, then the stars lining up in the late '80s when the studies were underway, the Fish and Wildlife Service came to us and said, well, what do you think is missing? And we had really good scientists on board. And they said, you know what? Look at what the river used to do, how it used to function. We looked at aerial photos, and we said one of the large things that are missing is these large flows. They don't happen anymore because we have the water's going into the reservoir and into storage. And so we were able to use consultants, our own scientists, and it formed a large part of the final flow recommendation was this geomorphology, or another way to put it is the river used to have large, high periodic flows that did things that some of it we don't know about, but it had a flourishing fish population. We do know that. And so on a smaller scale, we're trying to emulate what happened historically before the dam was there. And we did it with scientists. We have technical staff on board here. We have professional hydrologists, biologists. We have something like 45 people working in it. And one of the things that I think is unique is I think the Hoopa Valley tribe was one of the original pilot tribes under self-determination and self-governance. The tribe has been in the forefront of trust reform. The tribe today is probably one of the on the breaking ground of contracting with other interior agencies, in this case the Bureau of Reclamation, and breaking ground and saying this is a trust resource, the tribe is a beneficiary. We basically know we have to maintain technical capability. We saw that in the litigation. The real world is you have to have your own expertise, your own scientists, your own information that you're building and using the best available science, because that's a legal standard, that we had to possess those capabilities. We couldn't rely on the government to say, well, the government's supposed to protect our trust and our interests. That's unfortunately not the real world that we live in. And we really saw that in the way this whole thing played out in the end, and hope in the end, the tribe being on the end of the prevailing side of, or at least getting us the water component of it. Now the challenge before us, like I said, is to make sure that we can show that that water is used prudently, I guess.